Welcome, everyone. Good boy, Tucker. This is learning at its most fun.
Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Jacqueline Anderson, and I am one of the trainers here at Redtail. This is our second part to our workflow series that we will be conducting for the month of March. So just want to reiterate, this is the second part of our workflow series, and it is on building templates. Hopefully you were able to log in last week with my wonderful coworker, Curtis, who led a great whiteboarding seminar on how to kind of get your ideas on paper and structure them for the workflow. And we're actually going to use that information that Curtis used today to create our templates. So I will be honest, templates are not that difficult. They're just going to be tedious. So we've got a lot of work ahead of us today. So I do just want to jump right in here and kind of explain to you what's going to happen. So today we will be building 3 separate workflows. We will first be, like I said, building on Curtis's progress that he made by whiteboarding out all these processes for us. So we have our required information workflow, our client review workflow, and our prospecting process. And we will be building all 3 of these today in our template builder within Redtail. So we're going to take all 3 of these processes, and I'm going to show you all 3 really quick. So we will be flipping back and forth through the presentation here, but we have 3 separate types of workflow. So our required information workflow, if you remember working with Curtis, is more of a list. It's a little simpler. The target date is going to be 1 week after the workflow is created. Then we have our client review workflow, which is a little bit more complicated. We have the ability to use what Curtis so beautifully went over, outcomes, as well as this one is target date lists. So we were going to have to do some math and do some target. I believe our target date is a week before our meeting. And then we have a little bit of some time after our target date to update the client. Then our third is our prospecting process. And this is when we get rather complicated and complex with our possible outcomes. So we will be working on that one last. Awesome. So let's go back to the beginning here. And let's get started with this required information workflow. So we're going to go into the system now, and I'm going to take us into Redtail. And first, in case you have never built a template before, we are going to just access our template building section of Redtail. Now, to build a template, you will not go into your workflow tab. You will need to come up to your name in the top right-hand corner and come down to manage your account. So templates are very different from like just going and making a workflow, because what we're doing is kind of planning for the future and creating structure for the future of our processes. And you'll notice the third section when we open this manage your account portion of Redtail is the manage templates. And the bottom option is our workflow templates. So that's where we're going to head into. And don't be afraid if you see, you don't have any workflow templates. That just means, hey, you haven't created any workflow templates yet. So that's what we're going to do today. Mine are apparently being shy and not wanting to show themselves right now, but we are going to create a new one. So in order to create a new workflow template, we're going to come up to this blue new button in the top right-hand corner and give that cutie pie a click. And it'll open up to this workflow details section. Now, this is your first step, or our first step, in creating our workflow. So from here, we can give our workflow a name. Now, this is important because we don't just want to call our workflows like workflow 1 or workflow 2 or 3 or A or B or C, because we want to know what the workflow is. And by labeling it workflow 1, it really doesn't allow you to see or understand what it is until after you open it. So we want to make sure that we're giving our workflows meaningful names. Now, I'm going to do something that's probably a little unconventional here, but we are going to split. I'm so sorry. Let's actually just pop back over to our list right now and see. We're going to call this the required information workflow. Okay, perfect. Required, important, one and the same. Okay, awesome. Perfect. Now you'll notice your status is going to always be set to under construction. So something we want to keep in mind is that when we're ready to use our workflow, we want to make sure that we set it to active. That being said, you also have the ability to set your status to inactive on a workflow template. So if you ever are maybe saying we don't really need to use this right now, or this is something that we only use once a year, you can go ahead and make it inactive so maybe users don't get confused and use the wrong template. So since we're still working on it, we're going to set this to under construction. If we wanted to, just to be safe, we could also set it to active so we don't forget, but we're going to practice coming back over here and setting it to active when we're finished. Awesome. The next drop down that we get to go through before we actually build our workflow is the owner section. So the owner, think of them at like there's someone who potentially might not be physically working in the workflow, like they don't have any tasks assigned to them. They're not someone who's going to be working directly with the team on the process, but maybe they need to know what's going on. So for example, through our templates, we have the ability to select a variety of things that could potentially be our owner. Now you'll notice we can select an individual user. So if my sister Rachel and I, we have our business together, maybe she's in charge. I want her to be in charge of the workflow and I'm going to be assigned to all the tasks. Or potentially I am going to be the one overseeing the workflow and I will be the one who is performing some tasks. So think about the owner as the person or team or role that potentially needs to be kept in the loop. They are kind of, I like to think of them as the project manager of the workflow. So even if there's someone who's not going to be assigned to any tasks, but they just need to know what's going on, that's a great use of the owner. I'm actually going to use, for this one, creating user is also another option that you have. So if you're creating a workflow that's maybe like this one, where it's a simple checklist and it's required information, what you can do is automatically plug the person in who chooses to use the template as the owner. So then, like for simple things like this, it's easy to keep, who created the workflow, who is the owner, as well as the assignees of the tasks, which we will go over in just a bit. So you do have quite a few options for your owner. I vote we make this my sister because she's super organized and I would love her to lead my team. Next, we have our categories. So the categories that are shared with workflows are also shared with your notes and activities. So for this one, it's required information. So we're going to say it's a client update. And then we are able to set our target date. Now we're going to go back into the slideshow one more time so I can kind of see when the target date is. 1 week after the, 1 week after the workflow is created is when our target date is supposed to be. All right, let's go back in to our CRM. Now, this is going to tell us exactly how long we're going to take or how much time we want to give ourselves to complete the workflow. Now, for this, it's 1 week. So we want to give ourselves 1 week. Perfect. So the target date will be 1 week after the creation date. For example, if we came in and started our workflow today, it would be due on 1 week from now, so the 17th. Excellent. Now, if you are someone who does not work on the weekends or holidays, and I really hope that's all of you, you can also click this little box and it will not take any time away from your workflow to exclude weekends and federal holidays. It still includes weekends and federal holidays in your schedule. What happens is, though, if you do have a workflow target date that is due or a task due date that's due or falls on a Saturday, a Sunday, or a holiday, it will push it out to the next business day. So it's not cutting those days out of your schedule. It's just being mindful of them so you don't go on vacation or take your weekend break and come back and have a bunch of overdue tasks. So this can be really useful, and I highly recommend if you're not working on the weekends or taking your holidays, which you should be doing, to click that box. And then we're also able to add a description if we wanted to. So if we wanted to add maybe in here that this is required every 6 months, or this is required for every new client. And we can say also as well, which is very important to note, we can put a notation in here that the target date is 1 week from creation. So everybody knows, whoever is using this workflow, this will pop up for them. Excellent. So once we have all of our decisions made up here, we can hit continue, and this will lead us to creating our first step and task. So for the actual creation of the workflow, which we're about to jump into, we're going to put in that important information. I always advise that we build out our skeleton first. Now, what does this mean? Well, this means that we're going to create our steps and our tasks before putting in any pieces of information. So let's go back one more time into our PowerPoint. This is not one more time. I was misleading. Let's count how many tasks we're going to have, because this is going to be a list. So we're creating just a very quick checklist for us to utilize. First, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We have 6 tasks. So we're going to go back into the CRM and let's collapse this step by using our little arrow on the left-hand side and our little arrow on the task. So we can collapse it so it looks nice and pretty. And let's add our 6 steps. So we've got 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Awesome. Okay. And I love that it counts it for you, because I would have to come back up here and be like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, but it does count it for you. Excellent. So once we have the skeleton of our workflow built out, which is really easy with this one because we just have the one step and the tasks underneath it. Let's expand our step details, which is this first and farthest over arrow, so we can add information up here. So we are going to name our step first, and let's check. It's just called the perfect. So it's the exact same thing as our title that we have listed. So I'm actually just going to copy and paste this over. Not make you all watch me type, because you're going to have to watch me type a lot in a little bit. Awesome. And then we can decide when we want the step to be due. So coming over here, you'll notice you get a drop down. Now the drop down is going to tell you, hey, do you want this to be due before the target date, after the target date, or on the target date? My favorite thing about lists is that the step due date is very simple, and we can select on the target date. So then all of the tasks will be programmed to be due on the target date of the workflow. Perfect. So once we have this information figured out, I'm going to collapse my step details, because we have our target date, we have our title, correct, perfect. Now let's start filling out task information. So we're going to come down to our first little carrot here. I guess it's an arrow. Maybe it looks like a carrot. And we can fill out our task information for our very first action item. So I'm going to go back into my PowerPoint, assign category matching HOA category. So I'm going to say assign matching HOH category. Oh, HIH. Of all the things to misspell. Interesting. In system. Right? I mean, I was expecting me to misspell category. I'm actually pretty proud of myself here. Now, we can also pre-select, I should say, an assignee. So we can, once again, we have similar options to our owner. We can select a user, a team, a role, or the creating user. Now for this one, I'm going to select creating user. Or if we didn't want just to have the person who is initiating the workflow to be in charge of it, we could also select other users from our team, or potentially even a role. So like the client's advisor, the associate, or even their CSA. I just want to notate that if you are going to use this option, we want to make sure that it's programmed on the client profile. And if you are curious on how to do that, we have lots of other videos that explain how to set permissions and roles on a profile that we can point you to. Excellent. So for this one, I think creating user is probably the best. And then finally, If we had any additional pieces that we wanted to add to our workflow, like maybe this particular task, we could also add it in the description. So if you wanted to say, okay, so we're assign matching the HOH category in the system, we can make a note and say, check all platforms. And what's even cooler is you could even go the extra mile if you wanted to get very specific with your users and say, okay, so we're going to check LPL and Schwab and any other system you can think of. So you can really get as specific as you want to, which is very nice. Excellent. So let's fill out the rest of our tasks here. I'm just going to pop back into my PowerPoint. We have our fill out tax ID, fill out date of birth. Out tax ID, that's an important one. And I'm going to make this the creating user as well. Fill out date of birth. Now, I will point out as we get into our fourth task here that you don't have to pre-select an assignee if you don't want to. And you don't have to make them all the same. So if maybe for this one, which I believe is marital status, you may decide that you want a team, like the admin team, to be a part of that. So they can give you the correct information. Oh, my S stuck, darn. Perfect. And then we finally have our driver's license and add head of household, family, add family. Oh, and let's maybe give this to the admin team too. Perfect. And then add DL information. Awesome. Perfect. So we have our nice little list built out now. If we wanted to expand it just to kind of see how things looked. But this is how we could set up a basic checklist template in the system. Alrighty. So now that we're finished with this one, I'm actually going to come back over to my status and set it as active. And then I'm going to come back over and just save my workflow template right in the top right-hand corner. Excellent. So that'll take us back to our home screen. And lucky for us, we need to come back here because we're going to move on to our second workflow. So we're going to go back into our PowerPoint, and now we're going to build our client review process. So our client review process is going to be a little bit more complicated. We're going to use a couple more of our little drop-down items. It's like level 2 of our building template. So I think we can all handle it. Let's get started. Awesome. So I'm going to come back up to my new button here. We're going to give it our name. Awesome. I'm going to leave it in under construction until I'm done. I'm going to leave this one as creating user. And I would recommend, if you do not have a client review or a client review category or something to do with reviews, I would highly recommend making one. Which I might need to actually. So this is a wonderful lesson for me too. I thought I had one. You learn something new every day. We'll say it's an update. Perfect. Now for this one, we also said that it was 1 week. Perfect. So we want this to be due 1 week after creation date. And then we can exclude our weekends if we want to. I'm going to put in here that my target date is 1 week. just as a reminder to myself. So then when I use the workflow in the future, I don't have to wonder. Excellent. Let's hit continue. And let's build out our skeleton. So this workflow, like I said, is going to be a little different because we have multiple steps and different numbers of tasks in each of those steps. So first I'm going to add my other 2 steps. So step 2, I'm going to collapse that. Add step 3, collapse this guy. Awesome. Now I'm going to add my tasks for each step. So I do need to go back into my PowerPoint and count how many I have. Awesome. So it looks like we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then we have 1, 2, and then 3 in our final one. Excellent. So 6, 2, and 3. Let's go back in. We're going to add our 6 to our top one. 3, collapse. 4, collapse. 5, collapse. We're almost there. 6, collapse. Okay, perfect. And then we have our second one, and then 3 for our final one. Excellent. Okay, so our skeleton is all built out for this particular workflow. Now we can repeat exactly what we did on a previous step, except this time our target dates are going to look a little different. So we have our first step. Let me go back in and see what this one's called. This one's called prepare for review meeting. Perfect. And then we're able to select what we want this step to be due. Now let's take a look at our map again. So it says we want this one to be due 7 days. So it looks like we're using the majority of our workflow time, or the chunk of time that we've set aside to prepare for the actual meeting. So this one can be due on the target date as well, because we're just giving ourselves a week to complete the first step. But don't worry, everybody. These 2 steps will also have target dates. They're just going to look a little different. So let's finish setting up step 1, which we're giving ourselves the week to prepare for the meeting. Or actually, double check here. There we go. So yes, for this one, we're actually going to say this is due before the target date, because we're going to say our meeting is on the target date. So for this one, we can say that we want it to be done 6 days before or 1 day before the target date. And the reason why we do that is because we wanted to give ourselves a week to complete this particular workflow, but our target date is going to be in a week. So we want to give that final day to be actually for the meeting and that target date. But we want to give ourselves all the rest of that week to prep for this meeting. So in order to establish that target date, we're going to take the amount of time we want to give ourselves to complete the step, and we're going to subtract it from our target date. So that gives us 1 additional day. So 6 minus 7 is 1. And that gives us how many days before the target date we need to be finished. Excellent. So now that we have decided when we want this step to be due, we can start adding our tasks, just like we did for our other step, our other workflow. So we have run plan report from planning software, run plan report. And just like our other workflow, we could also add, which particular planning software we want the person to run from, as well as select maybe a user or team that could complete this task. Perfect. Let's do our second task now. And we have run and print notes and reports. Perfect. Collapse that one, open this guy back up, click over, run review UDF report, and run review email report. I already forgot it. That's why one at a time works better. Run email report. Perfection. Okay, only 2 more of these to go. Oh, I forgot my assignee, everyone. But like I said, you can leave these blank if you ever choose to, or if it's just easier for you at the moment. I do recommend filling them in because as you'll see in our second part, or in our third part, I'm the second part, in our third edition of our workflow series, when we actually apply the workflows, it saves you a ton of time to pre-program in the assignees. Excellent. So we'll go to our 5th task here, and we have review and print yearly goals. Goals. I love goals. Setting goals is important, isn't it? And then confirm meeting. Perfect. Awesome. Okay, good. So we've completed step 1. Let's move on to step 2. Now, if we go back into our workflow, you can see we have our review day items. So this is going to be our actual meeting, and we have 0 days before the target date. So this one is going to be due on the target date. So we have our step due on the target date. Ooh, that's not right. Review meeting. Was that what it was? Review day items. We'll call it that. Items, perfect. And we can add, and it looks like we only have 2 things. So we can say we need to prep the conference room and prep and gather all relevant paperwork. So we're going to expand our task. I'm going to collapse my heading. Don't need to see that right now. First, we will print document or prep the conference room. And print all relevant documents. Awesome. And I was just on a roll there typing. So I am going to go back now and put in my assignees. Maybe say the creating user. I will say the creating user for this one too. Excelente. Woo. Okay. Awesome. Look at us go. We are just getting through this right now. I am so proud of us. Let's move on to step 3. So step 3 is our follow-up. And for this one, it's going to be 2 days after the target date. So we've used almost all 3 of our options today, which is really cool already. And it's only been like 30 minutes. But first, for this one, we have our 3 tasks. We're going to enter our meeting notes from the meeting, make and record adjustments, and follow-up call. So let's add those in. So we're going to call this our follow-up. And then our step is going to be due after the target date, and it said 2 days. Now this, when we use after the target date, we don't need to do any math because all we're doing is counting out since it's after the target date, not before. So we're just going to say 2 days, excellent, and then collapse this cutie pie. Awesome. So we're going to add meeting notes. And once again, we might want to get specific here. We might want to say, add in Redtail and add in OneNote if we're using maybe another platform for notes as well. We're going to select our wonderful assignee again. Let's mix it up. Let's go back to our admin team here, maybe for adding those notes. Then our second was review and update, or update with any changes. Excellent. And let's maybe make that the creating user. And then finally, we have our follow-up call. Excellent. We'll make that the creating user too. Perfect. So we have our nice setup for our second workflow. Now for this workflow, and I'm going to go back into the PowerPoint to kind of articulate this, we do have the ability to add something called outcomes. Now for this one, it's going to be particularly important because we want to make sure that we give our user different pathways in case different things come up during the client review process. So you'll see over on the left-hand side, we have our outcomes, and we can see that, okay, so if the client reschedules, we're going to repeat the step. If the meeting confirms, and then we're going to move on to our second step. But if the client cancels, we also have the ability to end the workflow. Same with our second day, our second step, our review day items. We have the ability to go back to the first step in case the client reschedules. But if they complete it, we can move on to our third. And if they cancel, we also have the ability to end the workflow from there. Now, these can be incredibly useful because remember, we want to have an accurate kind of picture of the data weeks after this occurs. So if the client canceled on the review day, we want to know about that. So then we can save it on their profile in the future and be aware, hey, they haven't had a meeting, but they also canceled on the day of last year. So let's just be aware of this particular client. Awesome. So we're going to go back into step one and add our first couple outcomes here. So we're going to expand. And then we are going to, so you're going to see this little teeny tiny place down here that says add an outcome. So we're going to click add outcome, and you'll see that you have the ability for a dropdown and the outcome name. Something I will give you a disclaimer about outcomes. They all have to have different names and they all have to be going to different places. So you can't have two outcomes from one step that go to the same step. You have to have one outcome with a unique name going to one step, and that is the only outcome that can go to that step from the step you're currently on. I understand if that sounds confusing. I will show you what I mean. I will give you an example, I promise. Perfect. So we're going to name our outcome, and this one goes to, we are going to repeat the step. So I'm going to call this one repeat step 2. Step 1, we're on step 1, oops. And then we're going to prepare for the review meeting. So this will allow us to, in case the client, maybe we should call it that. We're going to call it client reschedules. And this one will loop us back into our first step. Now we can add another outcome, which we would need to do to get into our second step. So we're going to say the client confirms. Oh, just for my own sanity. Perfect. Excellent. And then we're going to add our third outcome, which is client cancels. And we'll complete the workflow. Awesome. So now we have a couple of different pathways we can get through here. What I meant earlier, and I want to be very specific about this because it can throw off your workflow, is we cannot have two outcomes that lead to the same step. So for example, if we had a complete the workflow option where maybe we said client reschedules, and we want to end the workflow after. We can't have two outcomes that go to the same place. We have to just pick one. Perfect. Okay. So now that we have our outcomes for our first step, let's add our outcomes for the second step. So we can say, awesome. Client attends meeting. Oh, my S was sticking. Excellent. We'll go to follow-up. Add another outcome. We'll say client reschedules. Prepare for review meetings to loop us back to the top. And then finally, if the client cancels, we can complete the workflow. Excellent. And luckily, with our final step, if we follow up, if we've reached follow up, hopefully the workflow is mostly completed at that point. Excellent. Alrighty, everyone. So we finished our second workflow. I'm going to come over to my status option and switch it to active and then hit save workflow template. Perfect. So now we're on our final workflow template. And I will say it's by far the most expansive one we're going to work on. So let's get to it. Come back up, hit new. And anyone who remembers what our final one is gets a gold star. Can you guess it? Oh, did you guess it? Was it correct? It's our prospecting workflow. So let's go visit our PowerPoint for the final time to see our final workflow. I'm just kidding. I'm definitely going to need to take a peek at this process a couple times. So we have our first interaction, second, third, and fourth all notated. And then we have our not interested and interested in meeting. But we also have a complex number of wonderful outcomes that we're going to need to set up. So let's get to it. First, we need to see what our target date is. So the target date is going to be the date the workflow is created. So everything in this workflow is going to be set to after the target date, okay? Nothing is going to be before the target date. So let's pop in here. Let's quickly go through here. And our target date, we're just going to set to 0 because it is the day it is the day of creation. So we don't have to worry about it. So we're going to hit continue. And then we can start to create our skeleton of our workflow. So we had 6 steps. I'm going to double check. Yeah, 6 steps. Awesome. So we're going to add 1, 2. If it makes you feel good to count with me, I totally understand. 3, 4. Maybe don't count with me. I can't count correctly, apparently. And then 6. Awesome. So now we can go through, remember, we're going to add our tasks just like we did. So first one has 2 tasks, second step has 1, third step has 1, fourth step has 1 task, fifth step has 1 task, and sixth step has 2. So we're going to add 1 for the top. Perfect. 1 task, 1 task, and then we're going to add an additional 1 for our sixth. So wow, that was pretty easy skeleton actually. Go us. High five, everyone. Awesome. Let's expand our first step and work from here. So our first step is interaction 1. And you can choose how you want to type that. If you want it to be fancier, you can make it in all capitals if you want to. But then remember, in our step due portion, nothing's going to be due before the target date because the target date is the day of creation. It's the day we want to initiate the workflow. So if we initiate it today, the day of creation would be the 10th. If we initiate it tomorrow, it would be the 11th. So we're going to set everything to after the target date. And we're going to say, I believe this is due on the target date. So we need to have our interaction 1 on the target date. So the first day we create the workflow, this is going to pop up for us to immediately have a step to complete. Now, we do have 2 tasks that we are completing for this particular step. First, we are make phone call 1 and send email 1. So nice and simple, make phone call 1, send email 1. Now, something cool that I did not point out in our previous workflow templates is that you can actually move the steps. So we can rotate the steps, or if potentially you decided, oh, maybe I send email 1 should be before make phone call. You can move the tasks within the step and you can move the steps within the workflow. And that is something that you can't do in a regular, like in an active workflow. So it's really cool that you can do it from here. So if you ever needed to switch any of your steps, you absolutely can. Awesome. Okay. So now that we have our first step figured out, let's move on to our second step. And this guy, I believe, is due 3 days after the target date. So we're going to say after the target date, 3 days. And this is our second interaction. So interaction 2. Perfect. I might just copy this word actually. Awesome. Now we can move on to our task and we can say, okay, what should we complete? Well, I think we've got another phone call to make, everyone. We're going to send prospecting email to. So we're going to send email to. Send email number 2, not number @. Perfect. Okay, we're trucking along here. And then we can say this is interaction 3. And after the target date, one more time, let's check to see when this is due. 7 days after the target date. Perfect. Our task is to make phone call number 2. I'm pretty sure. Yes. Yes, I was correct. Excellent, everyone. Pushing through here. And then this will be our interaction number 4. And this one, it looks like it's going to be due 12 days after the target date. Excellent. Awesome. So then our task is going to be to send, I believe it's, I'm guessing, and I have my paper right here, make final phone call 3. Excellent. And then, we haven't been assigning it to anyone, but that's okay. So now we have our interaction set up. Now we're going to set up our final 2 steps down here. And if you remember from our prospecting process, these 2 don't have due dates. So we don't have to establish target dates on every step if we don't want to, especially for these 2, because they're going to be telling us, hey, are they interested in a meeting or are they not? So let's pop back in here and add those 2. So we can say not interested in meeting. And no target dates. We're just going to leave this blank. And our task for this one is update contact category. Scroll down a little bit. Excellent. And then our 6th step is, luckily, they are interested. Interested in meeting. We did it. You all did great. It was mostly you. And we're going to schedule that discovery meeting. And update their category as well. And just like we did in our previous workflow templates, we could also potentially say what we want the category to be updated to if we wanted to give more information. We could add that in the description as well, or that might be a useful spot to add to utilize the description. Y'all are getting me all tongue-tied. Excellent. Alrighty. So then from here, now that we have everything established, we are going to tackle these outcomes. So let's take one last look as a group at our wonderful outcomes we're going to establish. So it looks like for each one, we're going to have to push to the next step, but we're always going to have the ability to say interested or not interested on every single step level. So let's go back in and start adding that in, because that's definitely going to be useful so we can see on what interaction level the client was interested or if they weren't. So we're going to do exactly what we did in our previous, and we're going to name our outcomes. So we're going to say, I'm just going to say interaction 2. Number 2, and we'll move on to interaction 2. Perfect, because this one we maybe don't need to repeat outcomes or steps as much, because we're not going to repeat interactions if we've given them 4. So if they don't respond in 4, we don't want to repeat the process. And we can say not interested in meeting, and then add our outcome where we say interested in meeting. Perfect. So now we have all 3 pathways on our first step. We need to remember that we have to add these onto our second step too. So we're going to come in just like we did in our previous template and say, okay, interaction, we're on interaction 3, so we're going to move on to interaction 4. Oh no, we're on interaction 2. We're going to move on to interaction 3. And then we can also add one for not interested again. And then a third one for that wonderful interested in meeting. All right, folks. And then we would continue doing this down all of our steps once again. When we were finished, we could come up and hit active in the top right-hand corner. So that way we make sure that our finished workflow is active again. And we would do exactly what we did for our last couple and just come up and hit save workflow template when we're finished. Now, we would go through each of the interactions. It is important to note that once we get to our not interested in meeting and interested in meeting, these outcomes will look a little different. So we would add our outcome, but for this one, we would want to say, okay, not interested, but we don't want to move on to our next step. We want to complete the workflow. So since we have these two stopping points, we're going to need to create our kind of finish line out of both of these outcomes. So we're going to add that one for these two. And then complete the workflow. So that way, when we get to these two steps from any of our previous interactions, we can make sure that the workflow ends accordingly. Excellent, folks. Well, that is template building. That is our second part of our workflow series today. Please feel free to join us next week. We're actually going to see the workflows in action, and we're going to have an opportunity to kind of play with them a little bit in an active workflow setting as opposed to just your template builder. Thank you all so much again for joining us. If you did have any additional questions, please feel free to contact us at 800-206-5030, option number 3 for support, or you can email us at support@redtailtechnology.com. But like I said, I hope you all can join us next week, and thank you so much for being here again on another Thursday webinar.
Thanks so much for joining us today for this particular session. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to give us a call at 800-206-5030, option 3 for support, or just shoot us an email over to support@redtailtechnology.com. Thanks a lot and have a great day.